Hi, my name is Venna. And my sister laughed in my face when I asked for just 12% of the family business. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how long they let me believe I mattered. How they smiled while quietly erasing me. My name taken off payouts. My ideas presented as someone else's. They used me, then called me dramatic when I asked to be seen. Have you ever realized too late that the people you trusted most were never planning to make room for you? Because that's where my story begins. It was late afternoon in West Austin. The dining room carried a certain formality that made even the warmest daylight feel cold. The long mahogany table was set for what they called strategic family discussions. For most of my life, those words meant I'd sit at the edge, smile politely, and nod on cue. But this time, I came with something different. I placed a neat, stapled packet in front of me, careful not to look at anyone until I finished. I'm proposing a 12% equity stake, I said evenly, steadying my voice against the tension sitting in my throat. In recognition of my contributions to the supply chain development, vendor mapping, and process automation we've implemented since the East Point transition. No one moved. For a beat too long, it was just the quiet buzz of the ceiling fan above. Then Isolde, my older sister, the face of the company, the so-called architect of our success, let out a short, sharp laugh. Not a chuckle. A laugh you throw out when someone tells you something truly absurd. 12%? She repeated, grinning like I'd just recited a punchline. Venna, come on! You're part of the support infrastructure. You don't own the foundation. I waited for someone, anyone, to shift uncomfortably, to say, well, maybe we should at least consider... But no. My father poured more iced tea. My mother studied her fingernails. No one said a word. That laugh, it didn't just echo in my ears. It reverberated inside every silent memory I'd tucked away for years. The late nights building pricing matrices. The weekends I spent debugging the inventory software. The holidays I missed helping with vendor rollouts, while Isolde gave press interviews in blazers she never sweated through. I pushed my chair back slowly. Not dramatically. Not enough to make the walls shake. Just a firm scrape on the hardwood floors. Deliberate and clear. Well, I said, standing, thank you all for confirming everything I needed to know. Isolde blinked. My mother opened her mouth as if to say something but didn't. My father cleared his throat. I walked out without another word. The silence wasn't new. I'd been raised on it. Back when I was 17, I sat through my first shareholder preview dinner. I wasn't a shareholder, but I was allowed to help set the table, print the menus, and refill water glasses. They called me their good luck charm. Not once did anyone ask what I thought of the warehouse relocation plan, or if I saw the flaws in Isolde's new delivery model. Even though I did. They said I was bright, reliable, a great vibe. That's what Isolde told people. I was the vibe. A mood board in human form. Her go-to person for damage control with vendors, or smoothing tensions with tired staff. Not once did she mention I was the one who discovered the inventory routing glitch that nearly cost us our East Point deal. One year, I spent 8 weeks rebuilding the cross-docking SOPs after our third-party logistics partner collapsed mid-contract. At a company mixer, Isolde clinked a glass and said, let's all give a shout-out to Venna, queen of birthday cards and energy boosts. They laughed. Again. I smiled. That's when I started keeping notes. Not just task lists, but proof. A quiet archive. Every diagram, every draft, every improvement I'd made. Dated, time-stamped. My backup drive wasn't for bragging. It was for survival. I never thought I'd need it. Not like this. After the meeting, I didn't go home right away. I drove aimlessly for a while, windows down, letting the Austin air scrape against my face. The sun dipped low, the streets buzzed with late-day commuters, and the world kept moving like nothing had cracked. But something had. By the time I pulled into the quiet side parking lot of Cedar and Grove Cafe, the sky had darkened into that navy blue that makes everything look more honest. I ordered a black coffee, no sugar. Sat at a small table near the back, away from the glass where people might see me thinking too hard. I opened my notebook, not the office one. The leather-bound one I kept zipped in my bag, the one no one had ever touched. Across the top, in clean handwriting, it read, Operation Selene. Named for the goddess of the moon, the one who worked quietly in the dark while the world slept. I flipped to a new page and wrote, They laughed. Build louder. The morning after the meeting, I woke up in a fog that didn't lift with daylight. I stared at the ceiling of my small apartment in Austin, replaying the exact cadence of Isolde's laugh. It hadn't been spontaneous or awkward. It was calculated. Cold. Like she'd been waiting for the right moment to humiliate me, and I'd served it up on a silver platter. I got up slowly, trying to shake the weight in my chest. Coffee didn't help. Neither did the usual routine. I folded laundry without thinking, wiped down the counter that was already clean. My hands moved, but my mind stayed frozen at that table. My voice steady, their silence louder. Not even Mom met my eyes after the words left my mouth. She kept adjusting her bracelet, like it was more important than the fact her daughter had just been dismissed. I remember Isolde's words from another meeting not too long ago. We had been introducing ourselves to a group of potential investors. She flashed her trademark smile and said, This is Venna. She's the glue that holds the team's energy together. Keeps morale high, right? They laughed. Just like always. I smiled, said my usual polite line, and sat down. At the time, I brushed it off. But now, after yesterday, the context changed. It wasn't flattery, it was a box. A soft cage built from compliments. No one ever said I was strategic, or essential, or irreplaceable. Just easy to work with, good vibes, helpful. That morning, I headed to the office, still carrying the weight of that realization. I walked through the back entrance, avoided the front desk, and kept my head down. I had one reason to be there. Pick up some files from the archives before I made a decision I knew I couldn't walk back. As I was thumbing through a stack of old invoices in the supply room, I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Bryn, the lead accountant. She didn't usually involve herself in anything beyond payroll. She looked around, then motioned toward a quiet corner near the printer. I shouldn't be showing you this, she said softly, slipping a folded paper from her folder. But I thought, you should know. I unfolded it slowly. It was a payout ledger, internal only, from 2 years ago. The East Point project. I'd been one of the 3 leads on implementation. I'd worked nights and weekends, making sure the vendor chain didn't fall apart. And yet, my name wasn't listed, not even under project support. They pulled you off the payout list after Phase 1, Bryn murmured. Quietly, no formal memo, just removed. Isolde signed the adjustment. I stared at the names that did appear, people I'd trained, people who used my templates, and they all got bonuses. I got silence. Thank you, I said, folding the paper back and slipping it into my own folder. I didn't cry. I didn't fume. My reaction surprised even me. There was no spike of rage, no tremble in my fingers, just a slow-burning clarity. They hadn't forgotten. They'd erased me. And you don't erase what doesn't scare you. I left the office without saying goodbye to anyone. Back home, I didn't bother changing. I went straight to my desk and pulled out my laptop. The folder I opened was labeled Selene, Private. I hadn't touched it in months. It held emails, designs, early models, screenshots, everything I'd worked on independently during weekends on my own equipment. I started building a timeline, documenting contributions, linking dates with email receipts, all of it. This wasn't spite, it was evidence. I wasn't going to beg anyone to see me. I'd make it undeniable. That night, I sat on the couch with a worn-out legal pad in my lap. I wrote, if I'd never asked for the 12%, they never would have shown their hand. Then I stuck a yellow post-it to the page. Phase 2. Build the engine. This time, under my own name. I turned on my scanner, began archiving everything, and before bed, I opened the company's mission statement, the one that hung in the front lobby like gospel. We succeed because of our people. I highlighted the sentence, smiled to myself. Then I hit send on every email attachment I'd collected in the past year to a backup account only I could access. The front door creaked open with a familiar resistance as I pushed it with my hip, arms full of manila folders. I hadn't planned to stay long, just drop off some documents for my mother and leave. But the moment I stepped into the kitchen, something tightened in my chest. It looked exactly the same. Same chipped tile under the breakfast bar. Same wooden chairs lined up like soldiers around the table. That table, the place where 1,000 decisions had been made, none of which had ever truly included me. I placed the folders on the counter and stood there, staring at the room like it was a museum exhibit of my own erasure. The silence was dense, not peaceful, but heavy, like the air right before a storm. And suddenly, I remembered why I'd stopped coming around so much. I walked slowly toward the dining table, running my hand over its smooth surface. My seat had always been the last on the right. Never at the head, never at the side where real voices sat. Always peripheral, always polite. The memory hit before I could push it back. It was the summer Isolde flew to New York with the team for our first big pitch to an East Coast distributor. They booked 4 flights, rented 3 hotel rooms, arranged car service. I stayed behind. Mom had just come out of the hospital, and no one even discussed who would look after her. The silence implied it was me. "You're better at the emotional stuff," Isolde had said casually, tossing it off like a compliment. That sentence glued itself to me for years. It was a pretty way of saying, "You stay behind, you clean up." Like I was the emotional custodian while they built a kingdom out of our last name. And it wasn't a one-time thing. I started listing them in my head as I paced the kitchen. The call about redesigning the company logo? I never got it. The investor meet and greet with the regional bank? I found out through a newsletter afterward. The retreat they called Strategy Week? They invited the interns, but not me. It hadn't been forgetfulness, it was precision. I wasn't just overlooked, I was filtered out. They wanted me around, not in, I whispered aloud. The clatter of a teacup broke my train of thought. I turned to find my grandmother's old china still in the drying rack by the sink, and with it, another memory crept in. So gentle, it almost hurt. It was 2 years before she passed. Grandma Ophelie and I sat on the back porch, a soft breeze stirring the wind chimes. She held her tea without sipping it, just watching me talk circles around whether I should speak up in the next family meeting. "You keep hoping they'll notice," she'd said. "But sugar, you were never invisible to me." Her voice hadn't cracked. It had landed, soft but firm. She handed me a notebook. Handmade leather cover. She'd stitched it herself. "Write your own chapters," she told me. "Don't wait for someone to hand you a line." I hadn't opened that notebook in a while, but the memory alone made me straighten up. I collected the folders, gave one last look at the table, and left. By the time I got back to my apartment, the sun was starting its descent. That golden wash that makes even the ugliest buildings look romantic. I pulled the notebook from the top shelf of my closet, where I'd tucked it like it was too sacred for daily touch. The note she'd left was still taped inside the front cover. Her handwriting was elegant but sturdy. "They won't always clap for you. Don't let that stop your music." I sat down and began writing. Not feelings, facts. Each line carried weight. Created inventory automation model, 2017. Redesigned logistics dashboard, 2019. Built East Point data pipeline, 2021. Line after line. Not guesses. Not support work. Intellectual ownership. By the time I reached page 5, the fog in my head began to lift. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't unraveling. I was threading something together. I printed the list, stapled it neatly. On the cover page, I wrote, "Assets they forgot." And I left the last page blank, because there was still more to add. A week passed before I heard from anyone at the company. Then, out of nowhere, a formal email landed in my inbox. Subject line, "Strategic Session, East Point Phase the 3rd." My name was listed among the attendees. That alone was enough to give me pause. I hadn't been invited to anything in months, not even the quarterly briefings. I stared at the message for a long while, wondering if it was a mistake or a trap. Either way, I knew I had to show up. I spent 2 days preparing. Quietly, I gathered documents, refined supply chain flowcharts, and revised the vendor cost optimization model I'd been refining on my own time. Not for validation, but because I needed to know for myself what I was bringing to the room. That Friday morning, I arrived at the Riverside office a few minutes early. The building's glass facade reflected the Texas sun too brightly, almost like it was trying to blind me. Inside, the receptionist barely glanced up when I signed in. Familiar routine, unfamiliar energy. When I stepped into the meeting room, the first thing I noticed was the seating chart, printed name tags at each chair, except one. Mine. Isolde turned from the whiteboard with a radiant smile, all teeth and polish. "Venna, great, you're here. Do you mind taking notes? We're short an admin today." I didn't answer right away. I pulled a legal pad from my bag and sat in the corner, away from the table. The meeting began. Isolde launched into a presentation, animated and charming as ever. Slide after slide appeared on the projector. Charts, projections, models. Mine. Every single framework I had mapped in the past year was now being used as the foundation of this new client pitch. She didn't even bother to change the formatting. One of the partners from New Jersey leaned in and said, "This new routing algorithm is impressive. Who developed it?" Isolde smiled. It was a collaborative team effort. I wrote nothing on the notepad. I just stared, letting each word etch itself deeper into memory. At the end of the meeting, while people stood and chatted, Isolde handed me a folder. "Could you file this in legal and have them log it before close of day?" I nodded. Took the folder, walked out without speaking. In the break room, I opened the folder. It was a contract, dated 2 weeks ago. It included a retroactive clause to consolidate and clarify ownership of all internal systems, models, frameworks, and proprietary intellectual materials developed under company operations. At the bottom, a blank line labeled employee signature, my name pre-filled. I felt my pulse spike, but my face didn't move. This wasn't incompetence. This was design, a legal landmine tucked inside busy work. I didn't head to legal. I left the building. Back in my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I went straight to the corner of the living room where I kept the fireproof lockbox. Inside was my external drive, years of backup. I powered up my laptop, connected the drive, and began organizing. Each file I labeled with 3 fields: date created, device used, location. Vendor map final.ai, created Saturday, March 4th, 11:27 p.m. on personal laptop. East Point optimization 02 UXLSX, created off-site during PTO. Shift flow prototype procedure beta.pdf, built during a weekend hackathon I funded myself. I didn't stop. By midnight, I'd archived over 70 documents, each one cross-referenced against calendar logs, email chains, metadata. The next morning, I called Elian. He was a quiet guy, sharp, unassuming. We'd worked together once during a compliance audit a few years back. I trusted him because he never flinched when things got messy. We met at a cafe tucked inside an old house in Hyde Park. No one would find us there. I slid the folder across the table. He read every page slowly. His expression didn't change, but the way he exhaled at the end said enough. "This clause," he said, tapping the page, "if signed, hands them everything. Not just your past work. Anything you do from here forward, tied to the company forever." I nodded. I didn't sign it. He looked up. "Good. Don't. And don't confront them yet. Let them keep talking. Document everything." We didn't say much more. He gave me a flash drive with encrypted templates and a checklist titled Ownership Defense, Best Practices. Back at home, I returned to the drive. I added another label to each document. created independently, not covered under employment scope. Each click was a nail, not in their coffin, but in the foundation of my own. Later that evening, I sat alone in the living room. No TV, no background music. Just me and the contract Isolde tried to bury me with. I read it again. They never saw me as unimportant, I said out loud, voice barely above a whisper. They saw me as uncontrollable. I showed up that Monday the same way I always did. Early, quiet, prepared. But the second I stepped through the front doors of the office, I knew something had changed. Not the temperature, not the lighting. The tone. My desk had been moved. It sat slightly farther from the team cluster, almost like someone had nudged it out of the frame. My calendar was wiped clean. No standing meetings, no project syncs, nothing. The only invite waiting was a reminder to update the break room snack rotation. Message received. No one said anything outright. That's how they did it. The same people who once CC'd me on everything now spoke in hushed circles when I walked by. Someone had deleted me without a single keystroke. I didn't panic. I didn't even flinch. I just opened my laptop, pulled up the file I'd written the night before, and added one line. Begin formal disengagement. Then I scheduled a meeting with Isolde and HR. 15 minutes, private conference room, no snacks. When I walked in, she was already seated, tapping her pen against the notepad with a performative calmness I knew too well. HR sat beside her, face unreadable, holding a clipboard like it was a shield. Venna, Isolde started. Let's make this quick. What's going on? I slid a single-page letter across the table. Effective immediately, I'm relinquishing my advisory roles and withdrawing the symbolic 6% stake I held. I'll retain no further claims to current projects or clients under the Glenwood umbrella. Isolde stared at the page like it had teeth. So, this is how you choose to go? I leaned back. No, this is how I choose to start. She looked at me the same way she always had when I solved a problem before she did. Tight-lipped, calculating. I hope you realize what this looks like, she said flatly. I do, I replied, already standing. That's why I'm doing it in writing. I left the room without giving HR a chance to read their script. After I walked out of the office building, I didn't go home. I walked south toward downtown, toward something that felt like air. I found myself at a coffee shop near 3rd Street, the kind with exposed brick and baristas who remember your name. I ordered an espresso and opened my laptop. A new file. A blank screen. At the top, I typed, Project Lumen, Core Systems Architecture. My fingers moved before I knew what I was building. Routing logic, dashboard infrastructure, API endpoints. All the things I used to have to sneak in through the back door of someone else's system, I now laid out freely. Not because I had to, because I could. By mid-afternoon, I had half the backbone of a logistics tool mapped out. Clean, modular, mine. 2 days later, I sat across from a banker in a small office just east of UT Austin's campus. His tie was too bright for the room, but his tone was professional. So you're forming an LLC? He asked, glancing at the form. I nodded. Yes, Lumen Logistics. He smiled. Nice name. Sounds like something forward-thinking. I didn't tell him what it really meant. Light, clarity, visibility. The opposite of everything I'd just left. I signed the papers, opened the business account. My hands trembled. Not from fear, but from the sudden lack of weight. For the first time in years, I didn't owe an explanation to anyone in that family. That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment with my laptop on the coffee table and wrote the first official line in my new business ledger. Mission statement. Built for those who were told they were just support. Underneath, I wrote, I didn't lose 12%. I found 100%. I stared at the line. It felt right. I closed my laptop, stood up, and walked to the window. Outside, the skyline pulsed softly under street lamps and starless sky. But in the glass, I saw my reflection layered over the city, solid, centered. Now, I whispered, let's build something they can't erase. The envelope was thicker than it needed to be. Off-white, embossed with the family company's letterhead in navy blue. It arrived by courier, not email, not internal memo. No warning. Just an arrival that felt like a slap delivered by someone else's hand. I didn't even open it right away. I laid it on my kitchen table, fixed myself a cup of tea, and stood over it like it might start talking on its own. When I finally slid it open and read the contents, I didn't panic. I smiled. A tight, hollow smile. Here it is, I whispered. They were accusing me of breach. Breach of proprietary materials, breach of confidentiality, breach of my own brain, apparently. The letter said I had utilized internal frameworks developed under company operations for independent commercial use, which would have been funny if it weren't so insulting. I knew they'd make a move. I just didn't think it would be this fast. That evening, I pulled my encrypted hard drive from the drawer, where I kept it tucked beneath old tax folders and a flash drive full of scanned childhood photos. I booted up my laptop and began the process I'd prepared months ago. The archive opened to a menu I built myself. Each project labeled, time-stamped, and flagged by category. Logistics flowcharts, predictive inventory, vendor mapping, and the big one, routing algorithms. One by one, I opened the files and reviewed the creation logs. All were made outside the office, on my personal devices, often during weekends or PTO. Built on personal laptop, off-site, after hours. That wasn't a tagline. It was my legal armor. I'd even sent some of the drafts to myself from a separate email address, specifically to establish a paper trail. My fingerprints were on every layer. I clicked Export All. The next morning, I emailed Elian. Subject line: Need your eyes. Urgent. No drama, no exclamation marks. He replied in under 30 minutes with a meeting time and address. We met at an old cafe on West 6th, tucked behind a yoga studio and a leather repair shop. Elian looked exactly the same. Calm, pressed, mildly amused by everything and nothing at once. I slid the letter and my flash drive across the table. He read in silence, nodding occasionally, mouth pressed in a thin line. Then he looked up and said, "They don't have a case, but we're going to build one." I didn't ask what he meant. I just said, "Good." He reached into his bag and pulled out a stack of forms already filled out. This is a counterclaim. Improper use of personal IP. If we file, we go quiet. You tell no one, no social posts, no shade, no leaks. Let them think you're unbothered. I can do that. And if they retaliate? I didn't blink. Then they're playing into our hands. Later that day, I sent Bryn a single message. Keep copies of anything you're unsure about. She replied with a thumbs up. Nothing more. The next few weeks passed in a strange kind of stillness. I kept building out my platform, kept documenting, kept quiet. Meanwhile, the legal teams danced their slow, expensive waltz behind the scenes. And then one morning, Elian called. "It's done," he said. Judge dismissed their claim, cited lack of contract, lack of clarity, and lack of credibility. Your rights are protected. The company's been warned not to attempt further action. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding the phone loosely. "Thank you," I said simply. "It's not over," he added. "But it's yours now. Clean." I hung up and stared at the wall for a moment, unsure what victory was supposed to feel like. No parade, no cheers, just air. That afternoon, I walked past the old office building. The lights were on. Through the glass, I could see silhouettes at desks, staring into screens, pretending not to feel the tremor beneath them. I didn't stop. I didn't wave. As I turned the corner, I whispered to myself, "Checkmate." It started with a text. Just a link. No context. From an old friend who rarely reached out anymore. "You've seen this, right?" I clicked. The headline was designed to provoke the hidden dangers of overreaching family members. Beneath it, a polished photo of Isolde, mid-laugh, mid-leadership. She always knew how to give the camera what it wanted. I didn't breathe as I scrolled. The article danced around direct accusations, but the subtext wasn't subtle. When a sibling feels entitled to credit for systems they merely supported, companies suffer. One quote in particular felt like a punch. It's easy to confuse contribution with creation, especially when loyalty is mistaken for ownership. I read it twice. Once with shock, the second time with numbness. The timing was surgical, just days after the court's dismissal of their lawsuit. It wasn't a coincidence. It was calculated character assassination. I didn't post anything, didn't text anyone back. Instead, I forwarded the link to Elian. "Do we need to escalate?" I typed. His reply came 15 minutes later. "Let them stack their mistakes." The next day, I tried to move on. Focused on hiring a second dev for Lumen. Finalized designs for the first pilot with our test client. But the article kept echoing in the back of my mind like static. And then I made a mistake. I reached out to Cressida. We hadn't spoken in months. She'd stayed with the family company after I left, though we never discussed the details. She was once the only person who got me. Late nights in the break room, venting over spreadsheet errors, joking about the company's dysfunctional family branding. We'd shared more than workloads. We'd shared doubt. I messaged her. "Hope you're okay? You saw the article?" No response. A day passed. Then 2. On the 3rd day, I found out where she'd gone. A podcast. I didn't listen at first. I didn't want to. But the headline popped up in a Google alert. "Inside the breakdown, when founders disagree." Cressida's voice came through my headphones like a stranger's. "I always worried Venna had a resentment complex," she said. Calm, measured, rehearsed. She was brilliant, but sometimes people want credit more than they want to build together. I froze. There was no fury. Just this quiet cracking inside, like someone tugging a thread I didn't even know was loose. She'd sat beside me in every meeting they never gave me credit for. She knew better. I closed my laptop, pulled the shades. That night, I didn't sleep. I got up at 4 a.m. and wrote my name on a sticky note. Just my name. Stared at it. Reminded myself it meant something. The following week, we acted. My team scrubbed my public profiles. LinkedIn, Angel List, Crunchbase, everything. Reframed every position, every contribution, dates, details, screenshots. Elian drafted a cease and desist letter to the publication and sent it quietly, without PR. "We're not here to win headlines," he said. "We're here to win facts." I didn't announce anything, but I did begin drafting our own story. Not a takedown, a correction. At a coffee shop a few days later, I ran into someone I hadn't expected. Lena, one of our interns from 2 summers ago. She worked for a small tech blog now. She smiled, surprised but cautious. "I read what they're saying," she admitted, after a minute of small talk. "I know," I said. "I'm not here to rebut it." She nodded. "Can I ask something, off record?" "Of course." "You were the one who built the East Point dashboard, right?" I blinked. "Yes." "Because I remember you walking me through the code. You even had me fix a loop." She stirred her tea. "They act like it was all Isolde, but I remember it differently." I thanked her for the memory, and for not rewriting it. 2 nights later, I was watching reruns in silence when a message popped up on my screen. No name, just a zip file. The sender ID was unfamiliar, but the subject line read, "For your eyes." I hesitated, scanned it twice, then opened it. Inside were screenshots, internal Slack messages from 2 years ago, Isolde's name all over them. One line in particular stood out. "Venna doesn't need to know we're presenting her data. Just sign it off as team effort." I stared at the screen, pulse calm, eyes dry. So that was the truth. Not just a whisper behind closed doors, but documented proof that my silence had been engineered. Approved, even. And now I had it. Elian didn't say a word when I slid the screenshots across the table. He just tapped the screen, lips pressed tight, reading each message slowly. Slack logs, timestamps, threaded responses between Isolde and the executive team. Venna doesn't need to know we're presenting her data. Just sign it off as team effort. I watched his eyes narrow, then widen, like a machine quietly locking into place. We file everything, he said. Countersuit. Cease and desist. Demand for public correction. I signed every document without hesitation. The table between us felt like a courtroom bench. Solid, final. By noon, everything was submitted. Electronically, silently. No press release. No leak to tech gossip boards. I emailed my core team one line. No one responds to anything. We let the truth speak. The storm rolled in on its own. By midweek, whispers turned into full sentences. I heard from former coworkers, from vendors who'd quietly dropped the family firm and called to check in. No one said it directly, but I could feel it. Something had cracked, on their side. The following Monday, I boarded a quiet morning train to Houston for the Regional Logistics Conference. I didn't go as a panelist or sponsor, just an invited guest from a small but promising startup. My name wasn't in the programs, but I dressed for clarity. Deep navy blazer, clean lines, no distractions. The ballroom was crowded but cold. White linens, chrome chairs, those miniature water bottles that make everything feel corporate and sterile. I took a seat in the fourth row. Not hiding, but not begging to be seen either. The speaker list was stacked with familiar names. And then, Isolde. Her slide deck glowed behind her as she took the stage, poised as ever. Same cadence, same charm. She introduced their new model for vendor optimization, called it a family-crafted solution. I sat still, my pen hovering over my notepad, writing nothing. 10 minutes into her talk, the conference host stepped up to the podium with a small smile. Before we move to Q&A, he said, we'd like to acknowledge the architect behind the model being discussed today, Venna Glenwood. The room shifted, heads turned, hands paused mid-clap. The applause started unevenly, hesitant, then steadier. Isolde froze, her clicker stalled in her hand. For a moment, her lips parted like she might object, but nothing came out. She clicked to the next slide without a word. That moment, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like truth standing up in a room that had been seated too long. After the session, I stepped into the lobby where the catering staff rolled out trays of lukewarm coffee and prepackaged biscotti. A woman in a gray suit approached me. "You're Venna, right?" she asked. "Yes." "You're the one who made the vendor map scalable?" I smiled slightly. "I was part of its origin. What it became, they took further." Her eyebrows lifted. "That's incredibly gracious." I shrugged. "It's accurate." 2 more people stopped me, one from Dallas, one from Raleigh. Each time, the same pattern. A question, a confirmation, a pause. I didn't give long speeches. I didn't smear Isolde. I didn't need to. That evening, back at my apartment, I set my phone on the table and plugged it in. The battery blinked at 4%. I left it charging and poured myself a glass of water. I sat on the edge of the couch and waited. She would call, she had to. After everything, the legal defeat, the public silence, the conference. But the phone didn't ring. And when I finally checked it, no missed calls. No new messages. No email. She didn't call. The voicemail came in mid-morning. I let it play out with the speaker low, half expecting it to be a delivery notice or someone trying to confirm a lunch meeting. But the voice was my mother's. Even before she spoke, I knew it wouldn't be warm. "I raised you to be loyal, Venna," she said evenly. Not litigious. There was no anger, just disappointment. Carved so precisely it didn't need volume. I played it again, slower this time. Her voice had a steady rhythm, like she'd rehearsed it. Not for me, but for herself. When it ended, I placed the phone face down on the counter and stepped away. That night, I made dinner in silence. Stirred sauce, set the table for one. The kitchen felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. I didn't cry. I didn't shout, but something inside me shrunk, pulled back behind old armor I thought I'd outgrown. The next day, I opened my laptop to check our latest metrics and saw a tagged photo I wasn't expecting. A family dinner. Everyone was there. Wine glasses raised, smiles wide. Even extended cousins from out of state. I hadn't known there was a celebration. I scrolled through the caption. Our core team, heart and legacy. My name wasn't mentioned. Neither was my absence. I clicked through the comments. Hearts, clapping hands, inside jokes. The kind you only understand if you've been part of the group long enough to earn the shorthand. I closed the tab. Later that week, Isolde posted a short write-up on LinkedIn. Something about safeguarding legacy in family-led ventures. I almost scrolled past it, until I saw the comment pinned near the top. The younger sister needs to grow up. Families aren't startups. 46 likes, no replies. Not even one person stepping in to say, actually. I shut my laptop and left it closed for 3 days. I walked along the river, the Colorado's calm surface doing a better job of listening than most people I knew. I tried not to think in circles, but the questions kept lapping at my mind like water hitting stone. Was I becoming the villain in someone else's version of this story? I mean, what do they say about me at those dinners now? That I sued my own blood? That I embarrassed the family name? That I took what wasn't mine? It didn't matter that the court ruled in my favor. In some narratives, facts are just inconvenient footnotes. By the third evening, I was sitting on the floor in my apartment, lights dimmed, phone on silent, when an email notification blinked on my screen. Subject, thank you, anonymous. I opened it. I don't know who's right, it began. But I remember how kind you were when I was an intern. You showed me how to organize supply data when no one else had the time. You stayed late. You explained things without talking down. That shaped me. Thank you. There was no signature, no return address. Just the message. And that was enough. I closed the laptop gently, got up, poured a glass of water. Something about that message stitched something inside me back together. Not fully, but enough to hold. The next morning, I finally checked my phone. One missed call. Isolde. I stared at the screen for a long time. No voicemail, no follow-up text. I didn't return the call. The package had no label, no sender, no stamps. Just my name, handwritten on the front in a way that made me hesitate before opening it. It had been sitting on the corner of my desk all morning, daring me to ignore it. When I finally sliced through the seal, a single photograph slid out. Matte finish. Familiar faces. It was the original team photo from our launch week, before the first contract was signed, before the website even had a privacy policy. There we were, 23 of us lined up behind a folding table in the company's first office lobby. My face was circled in red ink. One sentence scrawled across the top margin. You were never supposed to stay quiet this long. I held the photo for a long while, then placed it face down in a drawer. I didn't need reminders. But that handwriting, that tone, it felt like someone inside the system was finally seeing what I had refused to pretend not to see. 2 days later, Isolde's assistant emailed me a formal request for a meeting. The subject line was neutral. Strategic alignment discussion. The body was even colder. Given recent developments, we believe it would be beneficial to realign our external narratives, for the sake of public optics. Not a single apology. The location, a private boardroom at the Astor on 2nd Street. The same building they use to host investor brunches when they still like to show me off as the operational backbone. I replied yes. I didn't wear armor, just a black blouse, navy slacks, and a pen in my pocket. Isolde was already seated when I arrived. Her nails were fresh. Her voice even. Thank you for agreeing to meet. I nodded, slid into the seat opposite her, and waited. She began with language she'd always favored, vague, vaguely generous. There's still potential for shared opportunity, she said. We could present a unified front, reposition the legacy story, perhaps explore co-branding. I listened. She went on. You have a platform now, so do we. If we're smart, we don't have to compete. I still didn't say anything. Eventually, she paused. Do you have thoughts? I leaned forward slightly. I asked for 12%. You laughed. Her shoulders pulled back, but I didn't stop. I built something that isn't yours to negotiate with. I don't want a legacy story. I want a future built on what I actually did. And I've already started that. She opened her mouth again, but I was already standing. I won't revisit your version of things, Isolde. I'm not here for permission. And I left her sitting in that high-gloss boardroom with her branding proposals and her polished pitch. The next week, we signed the contract. Lumen Logistics officially partnered with Calder Freight Systems, one of the largest national logistics firms and a former client of Glenwood Global. It had taken months of quiet talks, prototype demos, and operational testing. But they were ready. The Calder CEO shook my hand and said, "We knew who built the system. We were just waiting for you to have your own company." We stood outside their headquarters after the signing, the Texas sun warm on the concrete. My co-founder, a former Glenwood analyst who had once been told he was too back-end to be client-facing, stood beside me. "I never thought this day would come," he said. "I did," I replied. "I just didn't think it would feel this clean." A week later, I walked through our new second-floor office in the heart of downtown. Glass walls, whiteboards already scribbled with potential. My name was on the lease, but it was the laughter I heard from the analyst's corner that grounded me. One of them was working off a code base I'd built years ago, back when my living room doubled as our R&D lab. Now they were evolving it, making it better, faster, theirs. I didn't interrupt, just watched for a moment and thought, I don't need her table. I built my own building. Later that afternoon, my assistant knocked lightly on the glass. "Hey," she said, "media wants a comment about Glenwood losing the East Point contract. You want me to forward or decline?" I didn't look up from the folder I was reviewing. "Let them print what they want," I said. "We're just getting started." The call came on a Monday morning. I was in the middle of reviewing onboarding documents for 2 new hires when my assistant walked in, holding the office phone with both hands like it might shatter. "It's Martin from Birchwood and Keller," she said. "Your father's attorney." The name alone told me everything I didn't want to know. I stepped outside and took the call myself. Martin's voice was low, practiced. He didn't waste time on condolences or empty language. "Your father, Mr. Warren Glenwood, passed away 2 days ago," he said. "The reading of the will is scheduled for Thursday. You've been named." I hadn't spoken to my father in nearly a year. Not since I'd walked away from the company, from the dinners, from the performance of togetherness that only ever extended so far. Still, I said, "I'll be there." Thursday came quiet and overcast, the kind of weather that made Austin feel smaller. Inside the lawyer's office, the walls were lined with thick books and glass cabinets of legal memorabilia, unread and untouched. The reading was everything I expected it to be: cold, formulaic, precise. Percentages, trusts, real estate holdings split down to the decimal. Isolde, unsurprisingly, received the majority of operational control. Then Martin paused. "I have a separate envelope," he said, clearing his throat. "Private, for Venna only." The room stilled. I stepped forward and took it from his hand. It was my father's handwriting on the front. Clean block letters, private, for Venna only. I waited until I was home to open it, sat in the kitchen, made myself a cup of tea I never drank. I unfolded the letter with hands that didn't tremble, but didn't feel quite steady either. The first line read, "You were the only one who didn't ask for more, but you gave the most." The ink looked fresh, like he'd written it recently. The page went on. "I saw it all, Venna, the hours, the work, the sacrifices no one credited. I should have spoken up, I didn't. That's mine to carry, not yours. I stayed silent too long. Taped inside was a small key, a safety deposit box number. Location: Frost Bank, South Congress. I went that afternoon. The banker recognized my name and didn't ask questions. The box opened to reveal a slim portfolio. Inside were copies, originals, by the looks of them, of project blueprints I had created years ago. Routing models, supplier architecture maps, annotated notes in my own handwriting, and in the margins, my father's. Initials, circles, comments like, "Ask Venna why this works better than V2. At the bottom of the stack, a check. It wasn't large enough to change my life, but it didn't need to be. It was made out to Lumen Logistics. The memo line read, "For what you already built." I left the bank and walked the long way back to the office. The city felt louder than usual. Buses, horns, conversations on sidewalks. But I felt oddly still. Not peaceful, but steady. Back at my desk, I placed the letter in a frame and set it on the shelf. Not where people could see it easily, but where I could. Just a reminder. It wasn't an apology, not in the way I might have wanted once, but it was something else, something that felt even more necessary. Acknowledgement. That night, I cooked myself dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta with garlic and olive oil. Halfway through the meal, my phone buzzed on the table. A message from Isolde. "He mentioned you in the will. Let's talk?" I didn't reply. I didn't delete it either. I just left it there, sitting unread. That message had waited too long, and now so would she. The email came from a journalist named Dana. She wrote for one of those high-visibility business platforms that usually focused on venture capital and tech bros with disruptor slogans. But this time, the subject line read, "Feature Inquiry, Underdog to Builder." She wanted to interview me, not about the lawsuit, not about Isolde, about the work, about the company, about what happens when someone builds a thing they weren't supposed to want. I stared at the message for a while. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to avoid the noise. But I didn't create Lumen to stay silent. I said yes. The interview was scheduled for a Friday morning. We filmed it in our office, with natural light streaming through the oversized windows and quiet chatter in the background. My team stayed out of frame, but I could hear their keyboards, their coffee cups, the tiny sounds of people building something real. Dana was sharp but respectful. She let the questions breathe. We talked about everything, the early days, the silence, the setbacks that didn't look like setbacks until you zoomed out. She asked why I never went public with my side of the story. I answered, because if you fight every fire they light, you forget you're not made of smoke. Her final question was the one I expected and dreaded. "Do you feel bad about what happened to your sister's company?" I didn't pause. "No," I said. "I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped letting them erase me." A week later, the video went live. It got more views than I expected, more comments than I could keep up with. But the real bombshell wasn't the interview. It was what came next. A former employee from the old company, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, uploaded a clip from an internal Zoom meeting. It was grainy, low res, but the audio was crystal clear. Isolde's voice. "Venna's good at tech," she said, laughing lightly, "but she's better when she doesn't know how powerful she is." It spread like wildfire across LinkedIn. No one defended it. No one could. My inbox overflowed. Not just from strangers, but from women who'd stayed quiet too long, from people who'd built things under someone else's name, from assistants who became architects, from shadows who were finally stepping into daylight. One message read, "I used to think staying quiet was noble. You helped me unlearn that." We started printing those notes, select ones, handwritten and framed, on a wall in our office. I called it the Wall of Unlearning. My team added to it. They'd read new messages aloud during our Monday check-ins. It became ritual. It reminded us that the work didn't end at algorithms. It extended to how people felt about their own value. And then, another text from Isolde. "Can we talk now? Without headlines? I looked at the screen, phone resting on the edge of my desk. The message sat there, blinking softly against the backdrop of everything I'd already chosen. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. It wasn't anger. It wasn't triumph. It was clarity. The next morning, I stood in the back of our new office, watching my team brainstorm on the whiteboard. Someone made a joke. Laughter broke out. There was no hierarchy in the room, just minds at work, building. Cameras were rolling again, not for another feature, but for our internal onboarding videos. We wanted future hires to know the story, not the pain, not the scandal. The truth. I recorded the closing segment myself, standing in front of the windows as the city moved behind me. They taught me I was replaceable, I said. So I built a space where no one has to feel that again. What I've learned through all of this is simple, but it came at a cost. Sometimes the silence you break isn't just your own. It's generational. It's cultural. It's the unspoken rule that says, be grateful for the crumbs because you were never meant to sit at the table. But I've built my own table. And if you're listening, if you've ever been the one who made the system run while someone else took the stage, you can build yours too. You don't need to scream to be heard. You don't need to fight to be right. But you do need to choose yourself, even when the world has decided not to. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you of your own journey, your own silence, or your own worth, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a 1 in the comments if this touched your heart, or tell me where you're watching from. And if it didn't speak to you, tell me why. Every perspective matters here. And hey, if you want more stories like this, stories that don't just entertain, but echo the reality of millions, subscribe to the channel. Let's keep building a space where no one has to stay quiet just to be included. Let's keep telling the stories that weren't supposed to be told. You've made it this far. Maybe it's time to start writing your chapter.